Welcome, everybody, to this very special episode of the Shift with CJ podcast. Why is it special? Because, unlike other podcasts, you don't have a guest on this show, but it's going to be me, CJ, your host, talking to you about something. The topic for today is blood flow restriction training. And I'm going to walk you through all the things that you need to know about blood flow restriction. Now, I always had this question: to build more muscle and strength, do we always have to lift heavy weights and work out intensely? Think about that for a second. Have you thought of that before? Or does this resonate with what you believe? It surely did resonate with me when I was started my training about 14 years ago, and I was trying to figure out how to become healthier and fitter. But then, as life started getting busier and time became scarce, I turned to biohacking and wanted to see if I could use the science and some minor adjustments to the environment to allow me to reverse this thinking and get muscle and strength with less effort. If you've been following me on social media, you probably have seen me with some kind of a band, an occlusion band. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's green, that I tie around my arms and my legs. Those bands, ladies and gentlemen, are called blood flow restriction bands. Blood flow restriction training, however, I consider to be a biohack because I have used it to gain muscle even when there was the no weights available, or perhaps the weights were really light. And this is how I have kept myself away from injuries when compared to other conventional training protocols. Not only do I use this hack to stimulate muscle, but I also use it to the advantage that I have over my hormones, and particularly production of new hormones, building new blood vessels, improving brain health and heart health. Now, I got inspired to use this hack by the work that was done by a professor named, let me see if I can get his name right. His name was Yoshikati Sato. Yoshikati Sato, who over 50 years ago developed this method and this style of training called blood flow restriction. Now, with any conventional training method, we're required to go about 60 to 80% of our one rep max. And we have to give the muscle enough tension for it to grow. However, I've found that with blood flow restriction training, the same effort can be accomplished by going as low as 20 or 10% of your one rep max effort. Now, some studies have shown when you put in effort as low as 10 to 20%, you can have increases in muscle size, which is about 40% in just 12 weeks. And that blew my mind away. Now, there are many methods of using this, and today I'd like to cover a few important things on why you should use blood flow restriction training. Now, blood flow restriction increases your fit, such as insulin like growth factor IGF-1 and growth hormone by 290%. It makes you build muscle with the least amount of effort. It lowers your risk for injuries. It hacks straight into type 2 muscle fibers, which we will talk about later. It increases your recovery, increases flow and the development of new blood, and it also increases muscle stem cells, which I will get to in a moment. Now, let's look at the hormonal part of it. IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1, is an important growth hormone in the body. IGF-1 is usually made in the liver, and the liver is responsible for most of its secretion. When you increase IGF-1, you increase anabolism. What is anabolism? It is muscle growth and the growth for tissues, cells, and again, your muscles. Blood flow restriction has shown to increase the production of IGF-1 not from the liver, but from the muscle itself. In technical terms, we would call this as intrinsic secretion, rather than waiting for the liver to produce this growth factor. And according to me, this is a huge advantage, all of you. And it is an advantage because new studies are showing us that IGF-1 that is circulating in the bloodstream, which is normally made from the liver, is not responsible for majority of that muscle growth, but it is the intrinsic secretion that you make with blood flow restriction training that can increase muscle growth. Another hormone I would like to touch upon is human growth hormone, HGH. Now, when you do blood flow restriction training, HGH increases, and this can boost protein production, it can boost growth, it can boost regeneration, it builds muscle mass, it can boost your metabolism, it could help you burn fat. And blood flow restriction training in some studies has shown to increase growth hormone by a crazy 170%. Now that's huge if you compare it to your normal training. Another pathway that I'd like to touch upon is a mouthful. It's called mTOR, and it stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. What mTOR is, it's a cellular pathway that is linked to anabolism and growth. mTOR complex, which is known as mTOR C1, is usually activated when you regularly stress your muscle. And this leads to a physiological process called as mechanotransduction. Yeah, mechanotransduction. It's a complicated word. This is when you provide mechanical stress on the muscle, and this sends some kind of chemical signals to the brain to help the muscle deal with the stress. Now, what is great in blood flow restriction training is that it is shown to increase the mTOR pathway and increase muscle protein synthesis up to 42% post exercise and 69% post 24 hours of exercise. This means that you can build more muscle even after your workout session, and this is why this gets so interesting. Now, some of you who've been following me for some time might just say that, hey, CJ, isn't IGF-1 one of those things that we must avoid when we are looking at anti-aging? Now, IGF-1 gets a bad reputation in the science of longevity because higher IGF-1 has shown to downregulate certain important mechanisms that extend lifespan. The first one is autophagy, which is your body's own way of self-cleaning, where the body goes and scans for all these damaged cells, and basically it's like a garbage house. It clears the waste. The second one that gets a lot of attention is AMPK, which is a nutrient signaling pathway, and when it's activated can help the genome, can help cells live for a long time. However, all of these are related with driving excess growth into the body via nutrition. For example, when you eat excess protein or calories that increase IGF-1 in the liver and in the blood, that is correlated with decrease in longevity. Now, according to a research done in University of Michigan, having stronger muscles is linked to living longer. And a study published by the Journal of Gerontology says that people with low muscle strength are at a 50% risk of dying earlier than their strong peers. Therefore, we understand that one of the most variables to extending lifespan is putting on some muscle mass and keeping your muscle mass on when you're old. Let's see why this is important. It's important because of a factor known as sarcopenia. What is sarcopenia? Sarcopenia is referred to as a loss of muscle as we age. So, as we age, we can lose over about 25% of the muscle that we have, and above 50% of the muscle until we get to the age of 80. Now, sarcopenia is actually responsible for 3 to 8% of muscle reduction per decade. And this starts when you're 40. And for some people, honestly, these days it starts when they're like 30 or 35. So this is something really important that we must consider. This means as we age, we are naturally going to lose muscle. So we have to make sure that we prioritize building muscle mass and strength while we are young and while we can. In conventional training, your strength coach or your just fitness coach would tell you to focus on muscle size by focusing on something called as hypertrophy, which is damaging the muscle fibers and causing small cracks in them so that the body recovers from this, and this way we get bigger muscles. So if I had to put it in an equation, it would be, if you want to get muscle growth, then you need to figure out your muscle protein synthesis minus muscle protein breakdown. Because every time you go to the gym and you lift up weights and you push yourself, your muscle breaks down and stretches the sarcomeres, which are these basic units that make up muscle, leading to a system called as cytoskeletal matrix damage. Now, that's a mouthful, but you don't have to remember it. Now, in response to this damage, our body sends out anti inflammatory proteins to repair the muscle. As we do not tap into the muscle fibers, these proteins aren't released. But here's where blood flow restriction training becomes interesting, because with blood flow restriction training, you're not actually damaging the muscle like conventional training. So you get less DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness, torque output, creatine kinase, and lipid peroxidases. These are things that sometimes you don't really want. And with blood flow restriction training, you're able to tap into a different way of growing your muscles, even with the lightest weight possible. So you must be wondering, how does blood flow restriction do that? Now, to do that, once you put on your blood flow restriction bands and start working out, the blood goes from your muscle to the heart, right? And then from your heart from to your body during the veins. So the blood that goes from your muscle to the heart is slowed down, and this creates an oxygen deprivation atmosphere in your muscles, also known as muscle hypoxia. This causes the blood to accumulate, and this pool of blood, which is now accumulated in your muscle, is going to do the magic. What happens is, with even lighter weights and training as low as 20 minutes, the oxygen deprivation sends a powerful signal to your brain that the muscle has been excessively stressed. The brain will respond by sending powerful hormones for the muscle to recover, which you would not get in a normal training scenario. Strong muscles, and this is because strong muscles are able to deal with the same kind of load in the future. So it is literally like, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Now, what else does blood flow restriction do? Blood flow restriction training hacks into muscle fibers. Now, everyone these days prefers getting involved in high intensity exercises like CrossFit, sprinting, weightlifting, due to its ability to increase muscle size, volume, and overall fitness. These benefits would normally come by engagement and activation of a certain type of muscle fiber called type 2 muscle fibers. Our body is made out of two skeletal muscle fibers. One is the slow twitch muscle fibers. This supports long distance activities like walking, running, and swimming. And then the second one is fast twitch muscle fibers. And these are the ones that provide big and powerful forces in shorter durations. And we've seen this, athletes use this in sprinting, powerlifting, agility training. And the secret to muscle growth is that for muscle strength, especially, you need to use type 2 muscle fibers. But when you use blood flow restriction training, because of the low oxygen environment, it allows you directly to tap into type 2 muscle fibers without using heavier weights. This is because type 1 muscle fibers get exhausted under low oxygen conditions, and these can directly impact and activate type 2 muscle fibers even with lower weights. So, what does that mean? You can use blood flow restriction training when you're walking your dog or when you're swimming, even things without weights. Just I use it every time when I take Jaeger for a walk. And when I come back, I'm pumped. Let's look at other aspects of blood flow restriction training now. One I would like to address is microcirculation, which is getting more oxygen and nutrients. Now, you guys know that I am really interested in anti aging. And I learned as we get older, our microcirculation in our blood starts decreasing. And microcirculation through the blood, or microcirculation, is actually the blood flow in our smallest vessels in our circulatory system. Now, there are different things. There are venules, there are capillaries, but their main function is to transport blood cells as well as oxygen from and to the tissues. That means even with using larger volumes of weight, it could be really difficult to tap into the capillary network that reaches type 2 muscle fibers. And as an anti aging hack, I have used blood flow restriction to increase my microcirculation. And this trick works only when there is low oxygen available. Low oxygen environments, also known as hypoxic environments, releases something known as hypoxic inducible factor 1 alpha, or HIF1 alpha, which then influences something else, which is VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. VEGF is actually a signaling protein that promotes growth of new blood vessels and muscles after exercise has been performed. So, VEGF is a powerful signal, you guys, to create more blood vessels. Now, how much blood flow or new blood vessels can it provide? In some studies, in young adults, the amount of blood flow and capillary network that's increased is 410%. And every day, we're receiving more information on how these mechanisms work. For example, the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 2019 was awarded to the discoveries of a certain mechanisms on how cells can sense and adapt to oxygen availability. This is when my interest in blood flow restriction peaked the most. And again, going back to something as HIF1 alpha and VEGF. Now, VEGF is a fascinating system because it can grow new blood vessels and capillaries directly to the muscle stem cells. Muscle stem cells have the ability to regenerate and recover the muscle. However, the effects of VEGF is also extended not just to your muscles, it extends its effects to your brain, to your heart. And countries like Japan are now using blood flow restriction because of its effect on VEGF to increase brain circulation and heart circulation that people have suffered with some kind of a cardiac stroke or people who are on a cardiac rehab. And this is because blood flow restriction training reduces the blood that goes into the heart and furthermore reduces stroke volume, the blood that actually re enters the heart in the next pump cycle. And this increases heart rate. Now, we want to increase the cardiac output in some injured individuals. So, how does cardiac output is measured? So, cardiac output is measured when you multiply stroke volume by heart rate. And a healthy heart can be pumping about 5 to 6 liters of blood every moment when a person is resting. So, increasing your cardiac output would normally require some kind of a training at higher intensities. And often you can increase your cardiac output by 3 to 4% over baseline. But what happens is this particular intensity is only available to either athletes or people who are really sick. And this is why I like blood flow restriction bands, because it gives this opportunity to increase the cardiac output for everyone, not just the athlete, but someone who's injured, someone who's recovering, someone elderly, and someone who cannot just work up to that intensity. The other thing blood flow restriction training can do is to increase nitric oxide. Have you guys heard of nitric oxide before? Now, nitric oxide is a signaling molecule which participates in nearly every cellular and organ function. It is known for its properties as a vasodilator, which means it relaxes the inner muscles, causing your blood vessels to dilate. This is in most of the pre-workout supplements, and this is how Viagra and things like that work. Basically, they just increase blood flow. And you can, as soon as you increase blood flow, you reduce blood pressure. So, blood flow restriction training is a neat hack to increase nitric oxide. And nitric oxide has other benefits, you guys. It can decrease muscle soreness, it can reduce blood pressure, it can boost exercise performance. In some studies, it has also shown to increase uh, things like managing type 2 diabetes, erectile dysfunctioning. And nitric oxide, which not a lot of people know, also benefits the brain via formation of something called as NNOS. What is NNOS? It's called neuronal nitric oxide synthase. And this helps us learn things faster by increasing our memory, building new nerve cells, and building new connections in the brain. The next thing I would like to touch on for blood flow restriction training is stem cells. Now, muscle stem cells are known as myosatellite cells or satellite cells, and their function in the body is to act as precursors to skeletal muscle cells, and these are usually very inactive. Blood flow restriction training can stimulate these cells, and upon activation, they can be directed for new muscle growth or regeneration of damaged tissue. Satellite cells do this by proliferating and supplying something known as myoblasts, which are precursors to myocytes or muscle cells. And these can repair your muscles simply like magic. So I want you to imagine this. There are these dormant cells in your body, and you can't reach them because there's no signaling pathway, but over time they lose their function. And these are so nice because they can like regenerate muscle, like I mentioned, increase your muscle. So you want to use them, mobilize them, and use them right now to build that muscle. And blood flow restriction training helps you do that. So what is next? Next, I want to touch on something called as myostatin. Myostatin is something that you should stay away from. And why? Because myostatin is a hormone that regulates, or I would say down regulates, that means it reduces muscle growth and your existing muscle mass. Yes, as humans, we are designed not to have so much of muscle. And myostatin is how the body does this. So myostatin, for a few who want to know more, is also a member of the TGF beta family, which is normally used or linked with scar tissues. And studies have shown that the lack of myostatin produces skeletal muscle growth. So if you block myostatin, in other words, you can be able to increase muscle and treat any muscle wasting disorders like sarcopenia. In the aging population, myostatin levels are actually than 2 times as when you compare to the same aging population that was young. So we can effectively say myostatin also makes you age. What is good news for all of us is that blood flow restriction training can decrease myostatin by 50%, which then can increase muscle protein synthesis as well as muscle building. The other thing that you will experience as soon as you put on your blood flow restriction bands and try to do some blood flow restriction training is a buildup of lactate or lactic acid. Now, lactic acid is a metabolic waste product that is formed when the cells are producing energy without much oxygen, which is your state of exercise. When you're doing like 20 to 25 reps and then you start feeling that burn is actually lactic acid, that burn or soreness. And according to new research, lactic acid can actually be used for something really nice. What is nice? Studies have shown that lactic acid can actually travel to your heart where it can be used to fuel the vascular network. This means lactic acid can be converted into energy in the body by providing extra oxygen and removing other waste products. Lactic acid is also produced by type 2 muscle fibers when we are using blood flow restriction training and downregulating myostatin. More reasons to use it. And lactate can be good. I mean, in traditional bodybuilding circles, you will always find that people think of lactic acid as just junk. But when you step over to the anti-aging world, you will see that lactic acid is important because the lactate can travel from your muscles to your blood and then cross the blood brain barrier, where it can be used as something known as a monocarboxylate transporter that drives straight into your brain cells and produces a very important set of proteins called BDNF. What is BDNF? It is called brain derived neurotropic factor. And what does brain derived neurotropic factor do? Well, it increases your memory, people start feeling more mental clarity, improve their mental performance, and so on and so forth. Like I mentioned before, blood flow restriction bands can also reduce blood glucose and blood pressure. And chronically elevated blood glucose levels have shown to increase inflammation, and chronic inflammation is the source of all modern diseases and is something that all the anti-aging people will tell you to get away from. Now, if you guys have already purchased some blood flow restriction training or blood flow restriction bands, then you might have some questions. So let's go over a few of them. How I get this a lot. Everyone asks me, how tight should those bands be? Now, our aim is only to restrict oxygen and blood output from the exercising muscles. But that doesn't mean that we should wrap the bands very tightly. We are technically, you are measuring, or you want to measure a certain pressure, which is called AOP, which is known as the arterial occlusion pressure. You don't have to remember that, but it's the measurement of how much pressure is being applied. And I would recommend you keep this to about 60%. So that's like 60 to 70%. That would be, if 10 is super tight, then keep it to 6 or 7 as a number. The next question people always have is, how do people feel? Now, as more blood flows into your muscles, your skin might start changing at this time. It might just become a bit pale. If you're an experienced lifter and you have some veins, you will start seeing a massive pump and the veins will pop out. And this is normal because we are reducing a little bit of blood. So having a change in color, and then while you're exercising, the nitric oxide and all of those things that I mentioned before means that you will get a heavier pump. So don't worry about that. I also tell people that a best practice would be to use the bands on the extremities that have been working. So if you, let's say you put your bands on your arms and then you start doing chest, do it for 10 to 15 minutes and then take those out. And then if you have to do the squat, then put the ones on your legs. And some people always say that, hey, if I train my back and I have the bands on my arms, will I have any kind of effect? Well, to answer your question, yes, you will have that effect because blood flow restriction bands have a crossover training effect. So as long as you are occluding the blood from your arms, it will also affect your back. Now, another question that always comes up is, how heavy should the weight be? Now, with the way blood flow restriction bands work is that you can gain strength and size using only 10 to 20% of the weights that you use for your 1 rep max or in a conventional training method. With lighter weights and more repetitions, you will see all the increases in skeletal muscle. And what about workout routines? I get asked. So, as I mentioned, I use it even with my dog. When I'm going for a walk with my dog, I would always use this. So, blood flow restriction training isn't really limited to your gym. I use them every time when I go for walks. And it could be used in multiple sports. I've used them in swimming before, and which doesn't even involve weights. So I would recommend you design your own workout routine in a way that you can enjoy. Just make sure you don't occlude the blood more than 15 to 20 minutes. And that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Now, blood flow restriction training has been around for many, many years. And I feel that it is a potential hack to tap into multiple dimensions of health and fitness with the smallest footprint possible. You guys know that I've been traveling excessively all over the world. And one of the things that I always have in my backpack is blood flow restriction bands. I can take them to a park, I can do a hotel workout, and I can still gain a lot of muscle doing that. So, with that, we have come to an end to today's podcast. I hope you are more clear about blood flow restriction training now. And if you guys have any questions, get in touch with me and I will answer all of them. All right, guys, this is me, CJ, signing out from the Shift with CJ podcast. All of you guys have a great day ahead of you.